Hello, I'm in Haworth, if you haven't already guessed. As I'm walking up Main Street, I can't help but wonder what shops would have been here during the time of the Brontë Sisters. I mean, of course, now we have cafes and we have gift shops, but during their time, there would have been more practical shops like a grocer's, a baker's, a butcher's, and of course, a stationer's. So in today's video, I'm going to have a look around Haworth and see if I can discover what was here, what shops were where in the time of the Brontë Sisters. So join me today on this slightly grey and foggy day and see what we can find.
Starting at the bottom of Main Street, let's make our way up the cobble path towards our first stop, taking in the sights and the history along the way. Had a lovely chat with the owner of the Modo shop, which sells homeware, gifts and unique finds. And once we'd finished talking about all the lovely things in her shop, she told me that in the past the shop was of printers and a stationer's called PK. I really admire how the shop owners have taken the time to look into the history of their buildings. This imposing building was once the Co-op, built in 1897. It replaced 4 cottages, dramatically altering the look of the row and towering over the surrounding buildings. Of the 26 cottages on the left of Main Street between the bottom and the Fleece Inn, 9 were occupied by woolcombers in 1851. Most of these cottages would have originally been homes to weavers. In 1851, 33 of the 94 properties on Main Street were occupied by shops or workshops, with businesses ranging from specialist clockmakers, cabinet makers to the more common grocers and drapers and bookmakers. Of the 61 domestic properties, at least 23 were woolcombers' cottages, meaning that only around 38 to 40% of the buildings on Main Street were purely residential by today's standards. In 1851, number 53 Main Street was home to Wheelwright Pickles Wright. What a mouthful. His cottage stood just across the road from his workshop, which once occupied a now demolished building on Main Street, above the top corner of Butt Lane. A clue to its former location can still be seen in the filled-in section of wall across from the lower range of the Fleece Inn. Next door to Pickle Wrights lived shoemaker William Newley, who both lived and worked in the cottage. Today, the 2 former cottages have been combined into what is now number 55. The Fleece Inn, which has stood at what is now number 67 since the 18th century, was still a 2-bay building in 1851. At that time, the lower cottage, now number 65, was rented out as a butcher's shop run by James Judson. At number 69, you'll find Wildfowl, a charming gift shop. While admiring the lovely items inside, I spoke with the owner, who shared a fascinating piece of history. A stone tankard she was given, engraved with the name of a former business on this site. At some point in history, the shop was a wine merchant run by Watson Ellison. Both number 75 and 76 were home to butchers, with 2 so close together the smell of wasted meat rotting in the night soil midden must have been unbearable. Here you can see the draper shop in the foreground, though it has now since been extended, while the whitewashed cottages that once stood nearby were demolished around about 1880. This image is a rare glimpse of the type of 18th century housing that was likely once widespread in Haworth, but which has largely disappeared. To the left, there's a footpath that once gave access to the moors. This was the shop of John Greenwood, the stationer who supplied the Brontës with their paper. In 1858, a year after the publication of The Life of Charlotte Brontë by Mrs. Gaskell, the Dublin academic John Eliot Cairns visited Haworth and described in passing a small grocer's shop that also served as a bookseller for the village. In the window, he noted an abundance of copies of Villette, Shirley and Jane Eyre. He remarked that this was where the Brontë sisters had once obtained their writing paper. John Greenwood began his work in life as a wool comber, was forced to give up the trade due to illness. According to Mrs. Gaskell, she said, he was a little deformed man, a jack of all trades, part mason, part gardener, plasterer, painter, and what not. He took great pride in his connection to the Brontës and was always willing to assist them wherever he could. One story tells of him walking all the way to Halifax just to fetch half a ream of paper for the sisters. At number 36, photographer John Moore had his studio. He later expanded into neighbouring properties and lived there with his wife and family. It's likely that it was John Moore who took that famous photograph of Patrick Brontë in 1858, which we all know so well today. Oh, I love looking at these old images and comparing them to the same location today. Not much has changed since this photo was taken in 1900. This shop, Booth, once belonged to Zachariah Booth, who started as a clogger and later, towards the end of the 19th century, transitioned into a shoemaker. The steepness of Main Street increased significantly as you approach the top, reaching a challenging gradient of 1 in 6. This means for every 6 feet you travel horizontally, the street rises by 1 foot vertically. The climb becomes noticeably steeper here, and it would have been a difficult ascent for both people and horses in the past, especially when laden with goods or after a long day of work. Here's another before and after shot of Main Street. While there are fewer flowers and less horse mess now, not much else has actually changed. The shop here, called Betty Moore, is named after a former owner. And inside there's a wonderful old ledger on display recording that Betty sold the building along with its outhouses to William Hartley on the 2nd of August 1869. If you pass by the shop, do step in and take a look. The penmanship is a work of art. This was once the home of Thomas Barraclough, the renowned clockmaker. A Barraclough clock stands on the half landing of the Brontë parsonage. Today, the building is the Hawthorne restaurant, which is not only filled with local history, but also houses a collection of Barraclough clocks. Of course, there's some clues. A lot of the businesses have found out what their buildings were before they took them over, and there are clues all around Haworth with information about what was there. And of course the hazard of walking up Haworth is this time of the day, early in the morning, all you can smell is bacon from the cafes, Cobbles and Clay and Villette over there. I've already had breakfast, but I'm absolutely starving now and haven't even made it to the top of the main street. I mustn't get distracted. But it's so hard to walk past a wave of nostalgia at number 74, Main Street. I have a huge soft spot for bookshops, and this one draws me in every time. I did try to find out more about this property during the Brontës era, but it was a bit tricky. So if you know anything, do let me know. But in the meantime, just look at all these beautiful books, all waiting for new homes. At number 80 Main Street, carpenter Noah Murgatroyd occupied number 78 to 80, while Richard Thomas, a wine merchant, ran his business at number 76. Both of these premises were located inside Gauger's Croft, and this tunnel would lead you through to this infamous and overcrowded place. One of the most squalid areas in Haworth and known for its terrible conditions and the spread of disease. The area above the Black Bull was once the heart of the village, where horses would rest after their arduous journey up the steep hill. And of course we have the old post office, which has seen its history uncovered in recent years. It was transformed into a charming cafe and coffee shop, bringing a new life to this historic spot. The building, now housing a book and record shop, was once the Penny Bank. It also served as the first location of the Brontë Museum before it moved to the parsonage. In the Brontes' time, however, it was yet another butcher's shop. In this section of town, there was once 4 pubs: the Black Bull, the King's Arms, the White Lion, and the now gone Cross Inn, which is now the site of Pave. Haworth's location on a popular trading route meant it was a popular stopover for travellers, ensuring that these pubs always did well. Poor Bramwell must have been spoilt for choice with so many pubs to choose from. The Cabinet of Curiosity is a feast for the eyes and nose. It's no surprise that this was once the druggist's shop, owned by Mr. Robert Lambert. Mr. Lambert would have known Bramwell quite well, as he was the supplier of laudanum, which Bramwell took regularly. The shop was conveniently located just across the road from the Black Bull, Bramwell's favourite watering hole. Today the shop is a thing of beauty, still stocking a mixture of potions, but now more are for washing and pampering than they are for treating illness.
So, Main Street, a lot more to it than we originally thought, hey? It was great to actually find out a bit about all these different shops and who run them, and then the lives that happened in Haworth, not just obviously the Brontes. There were so many people that lived here and we don't know anything about them. So I hope that gave us a bit more of an insight into the everyday folk of Haworth. If you enjoyed this video, please do that whole likey subscribey thing, because it really does help me out and it lets YouTube know that we want to watch more Bronte content. So I will see you next Friday, 10 o'clock UK time. Until then, take care, bye!